All right, folks, welcome back. About 15 after 7 o'clock Eastern Time, right here on TriX57.com. This is Double Jab Boxing Podcast, powered by the Atlantic City Boxing Hall of Fame. Rich Quinones is alongside Rob Scott, and as we promised, world-renowned boxing judge. You like that introduction? That's not bad, Joe Pasquale.
Experienced boxing judge.
World-renowned and experienced.
Well-renowned, well-deserved, though.
And the check is in the mail. How about that?
Well, I don't know about checks.
It's good to have you join us for a couple moments
Thank
on
you, guys.
Double Jab
Thanks
Boxing.
for having me on. Yeah.
And listen, it's always good to talk fights and to talk boxing and stories. We know you were one of the judges. Good fight between Garcia and Thurman. Good fight.
I thought it would be a great fight because you have two guys with an O, but it just turned into a good fight. And it was a good tactical fight. And there were some moments where early Garcia was on the edge, and then Thurman actually took a couple hard body shots that I think made him not want to engage after that.
Like we say, the ebb and flow of a fight. Now, I gave Rob the little teaser before we went to break with your career, which I don't want to say like a fighter had an inauspicious start.
You're talking about my start.
Your start. I mean, is it called can we deem it an inauspicious start?
I'll do the story.
Back in Trenton,
we were,
many moons ago?
Fight fans. I mean, from age 8, Moose Hall, my father and my grandfather, and listening on the radio to Patterson, Johansson, I mean, there was a lot of always on my mind, this boxing thing. That's my sport, What happened was when we had amateur events at the old Trenton Armory, we had great turnouts. And sometimes they were pro-am. We actually had Sammy Goss, who at that time was a contender. Actually, he was a contender for 10 years. Fought in the Garden, filled the Philadelphia arenas all the time. Great fighter, and so I knew the Gosses. I knew Ike Williams. My friend Frank Stallone was fighting amateur at that time. He was training in the Goss gym. So Percy Richardson was involved. He was the regional amateur official, and so in a sense chief of officials, and he ended up being chief inspector with the New Jersey Commission years later. He pulls me out and says, I need a timekeeper, and I did well for the first 2 fights, and then the third fight was a really good fight. And the referees started looking at me, and then the fighters. I had a 4-minute round. So Percy came up and promoted me to judge and put somebody else in that timekeeper seat. So my career as a timekeeper was 2 fights and a very long fight.
Well, you know our relationship. We go back like a long time. And one thing about you is when I used to be a writer, we used to correspond, and you always respected my things and my stuff. But having the opportunity to work with you, it made me see how gifted of a judge that you are. And that's not blowing smoke up your behind.
I think it's the 10,000 hour rule. If you do something 10,000 hours, you get pretty good at it, and that's
that
might be it.
It's funny that you say that.
Those first 10,000 hours are tough.
It's funny that you say that because we talk about this on this show a lot about how fighters or about how people, especially the fans, they look back and they say they'll judge a judge, they'll judge a referee, they'll judge an announcer, they'll judge everyone as if they can do their job like it's an easy job, and they could step in your shoes. And I know for a fact the things that you do, if they were put in your seat, they couldn't take it because the seat would be too hot. And, you've done, like you said, you put in your hours and you've done a lot of things, and you've definitely gained my respect because, like I said, we've worked with each other, and I see my respect came from what I saw and from what I experienced.
The respect is mutual. I know you as a sideline or as a hobby supervise international fights, and you're responsible for rules meetings, who gets the gloves, which official, is doing a good job. You write reports. So I thank you.
Well, no,
from you, I appreciate
No,
this.
but it's the same
Yeah.
with you. You.
Yeah.
It's the same with you. You put on seminars. You
Yeah,
put on judging
yeah.
seminars, and you let people know what it takes to be a judge. And
Yeah.
like I said, I don't think that a lot of people take in consideration what it takes to actually be a judge. They think that they look at the TV and say, "I can do that." You can't do that all the time.
Yeah, and you got to know the event. You got to know the card. You got to know the fighters. You got to know the tendencies. You have to have a keen eye. It's almost like you have to know ahead of time who you're watching and what the tendencies are. And again, a lot of times we always talk about being subjective, but if you understand what you're watching going in, then it makes your job. It should make the job.
Well, when you have that close round,
Yes.
you have to have that criteria, and it has to be decisive. It's like a referee. A referee has to make decisions. He may make a wrong decision, but if you get a referee who hesitates, that's the worst
Yeah.
referee.
It's like the old adage in blackjack, right? If you're going to continuously hit this certain way, then
Yeah.
just be consistent. Now, you've done what, about 1,500 fights? Well, I mean,
If
you're
you count
talking
the amateurs,
You talk the amateurs.
yeah.
So you're talking Duran, Chavez, Hopkins, Trinidad, Mercer, Kwawi. The list goes on and on. Second and third
Charles and
Gotti
Natural
fight, right?
Murray, yeah.
Right.
The second and third Gotti fights.
What?
And by the way, Gotti's early fights, and then a TKO by Angelo Manfredi, and one of his Ivan Robinson losses.
What are the most difficult fights in your eyes to judge?
It's three.
Is it tough? Is it tough working overseas
Oh.
and judging those fights as
Well,
opposed to?
Example, 2015, I went to Beijing twice, and we set up a boxing commission of officials. And in my classes, I had close to 60, 70 officials. And these officials had amateur backgrounds, they were fighters. And to the man, they were just all great. I mean, I could pick out a dozen of those guys, and they could work a fight at the Garden. They're that good. So people who are into the sport know the sport.
Yeah.
You know the sport. Rob knows the sport. That's a big part of it. It really is. I mean, you're there because you want to be. It's not a reward thing. It's like it's the best seat in boxing. Here I am.
As opposed to when you were getting ice cream sandwiches working in Trenton or Rahway, right?
Oh yeah, when I was one prison tournament I did at Trenton State Prison, we were paid with ice cream sandwiches. Only one to an official though, because back in those days, amateur officials were in shape. Yeah.
I was telling Rob, I was telling Joe before we came on the air, because I'm heavily involved with the amateurs as well, covering it and broadcasting and writing everything. And a lot of times, and not to put these certain the judges or the refs, just not to paint the broad brush, but a lot of times some of the kids get an unfair advantage, if you will. But I thought Joe brought up a good point, regardless of the scoring in the amateurs, which again, everything, it's goofy at times, but people think the standing 8, hey, that's going to influence the scoring. It's always there to protect the fighter. A lot of times, as long as these kids are good and they're groomed properly, eventually they'll have an opportunity to turn pro. So it's not like you get slighted a couple times in the amateurs. We're not talking about the Olympics here, but a lot of times you get slighted in the amateurs. It's unfortunate. It's disheartening to some of these kids, and they stop fighting.
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head. Sometimes it is disheartening. Sometimes some kids, and that's the trait of a champion. The trait of a champion and the trait of a future champion. A loss is a loss, and like I said, Ali. We can go down the line. Everybody's taking a loss. It's how you come back.
Yeah.
Now there are some people, especially if you're going to get knocked off your horse, if you will, and the amateurs from a loss, then that already kind of spells what your professional career is going to be like.
Joe, when you look at Atlantic City and what the Atlantic City Boxing Hall of Fame is doing, what they're going to do in probably about another 2 months, Memorial Day weekend in May, and just the inductees that are involved, it's kind of like a who's who. But
Absolutely.
when you think of Atlantic City boxing and back in the heyday in the 70s and the 80s, I mean, and you talk about Tyson, how you get that raw power down here, and all of a sudden people start to gravitate towards that. What are some of your earliest recollections of Atlantic City boxing?
Atlantic City boxing, I would come down on a press credential, and there were weekly shows at the Tropicana. Resorts led the charge on this. Playboy ran shows. Bally's, of course. Golden Nugget, when Steve Wynn was in town, puts together some really great shows. They were even promoting over at a local middle school here. I mean, some nights you would have 2 shows on the same night. It was big, and there was just so much boxing, and it was just great. And the guys who emerged, the Dwight Quayees, the Saad Mohammeds, the Marvin Johnsons, going all the way up to Prince, what was the prince from England?
Hamed.
Hamed. I mean, the excitement on that fight was it was equal to any Gotti or Tyson fight. It was amazing.
Do you see in the foreseeable future, I mean, it's been a rough stretch for Atlantic City with a lot of casinos, but do you see in the foreseeable future, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in the next month, but say within the calendar year, 2 or 3 years, where they can really start to bring back, because we talk about Madison Square Garden being the mecca for boxing in the 70s and 80s.
Barclay, I just worked at Barclay. Equal.
Let me tell you something. You're absolutely right. It is actually, I don't want to say it's going to trump Madison Square Garden, but we're kind of heading down that path. But what about Atlantic City? Do you
Atlantic City, just some of those Hopkins fights were gigantic, and they were recent. I mean, when he lost to the Russian, and then before that when he fought Marat, tremendous excitement on those fights, and that was Hopkins, who in Philly never really drew well, but in Atlantic City, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
Well, I always thought that, how we always speak every week, where we say, if you put on a quality fight, I think people will come. And when we're talking about the difference between a garden, and I worked many a garden fights, and, quite honestly, I worked many a garden fights, and I've never worked a Barclay fight. But when you're talking about how the pendulum is shifting and going over to there, I think that's a promotional thing. That's a promoter's thing. I mean, because Bob Arum, he still does a lot of his business in Madison Square Garden. Triple G is going to be in Madison Square Garden. So Madison Square Garden still has a heartbeat.
Yeah. And now the one thing that hurts this year, especially from an amateur standpoint, the New York Daily News Golden Gloves, it's their 90th edition. The last 3 years it's been in the Barclays. Now I think they're going to have the finals the one night because I'm doing them in Manhattan, and then the second night they're going to have it at the old Aviator,
right?
Or Flatbush.
I've worked there. Yeah,
Flatbush Avenue.
Yeah, it's a glorified Gold's Gym basically.
Yeah.
But there's another location that's emerging is the Nassau Coliseum.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's going to be big too.
Well, because of the whole issue with the Islanders.
But I really think most of this hinges on boxers who dominate, and when you get that superstar, that Mike Tyson, that Arturo Gatti, whoever it is, that brings the crowd. That crosses over. This Thurman fight with Danny Garcia, that was on commercial TV.
Free TV.
And they had
numbers
very big numbers.
They did incredible.
You got to love boxing. I mean, it's so pure and so decisive. And, team sports, in my opinion, are easy compared to boxing. And you've traveled, Rob. I mean, when you go to Europe, I mean, they're so nationalized on these fighters. I mean, you land from the airport to the hotel, you see the fighters are doing ads on TV. They're doing commercials. I haven't seen that since Mike Tyson did a Pepsi commercial.
It's funny because you're right. I mean, unless you win a gold medal, you talk about the markability. It's always the NBA players, the NFL players, the MLB players. You rarely see the boxers kind of endorse some stuff.
Look at Ray Leonard with 7-Up. I mean, nobody remembers 7-Up, but
Mike Lee does all the
deal.
Subway.
He made Subway. I mean, 7-Up.
Yeah. Listen, I know we only got you for another minute or so. I'm just curious. Before I let you get out of here, my last one for you. How about your role, Atlantic City Boxing Hall of Fame in the committee?
Tremendous. The support of the Jersey Commission, the fact that this is a 3-day event. Most of the boxing events I've been to, they're a dinner one night, whatever. Even the Legends dinners that we ran here a couple years ago, they were big. They were well attended. 3 days. This is going to be great. It's going to be monster by comparison. Boardwalk, parade, 3 or 4 events involved. autographing. I mean, this is going to be a great fight fan venue.
Yeah, Rob?
Well, no, I mean, the only thing I can say is what I said from the door, and that is that, I've worked with this man for several fights, and I've known him for several years. He's been trying to get me on the golf course for the longest, and,
Just for your lunch money. Yeah.
2017, we're gonna get out there, but he's one guy who I know when I supervise fights, I know that, my officials and him being the judge, I'm not gonna have to come back later on and write a report that, something was done wrong or, a questionable decision, because he knows his stuff. I feel very, very
There's a
comfortable when
bunch of
working with
great
him.
guys in boxing, I'm
Yeah.
telling you. The bench is very deep. I've seen referee after referee improvement from when I started. I remember a guy stepping over the fallen boxer to raise the hand of the other guy.
Wow.
Larry Hazard brought this thing in from the amateurs, and he developed safety as a mentality for a ref, and it's carried throughout the country and Europe and England, and that's where they're at now. It's just great.
Now-
it really is.
And I know John's talking in my ear. I know we're late on this one, but I would be remiss. You're a movie guy. You're a movie buff.
Oh, well, I've been around it.
You've been around it. So I'm going to ask you this in closing. If best boxing movie, it doesn't necessarily have to be all the action in the ring, but best boxing themed movie.
Wow.
I know it's easy to
I'll
say
give you
Rocky,
one,
but go
I'll give
ahead.
you one that I know a guy that was in it, and that was Mickey Rourke, and it was called Homeboy.
What year was that made?
Back in the 80s,
Okay.
late 80s, I believe.
See, I kind of pictured
Check
you
it-
for an on the
check-
waterfront kind of guy.
Check it out.
But what about on the waterfront?
On the waterfront is a whole different story. It's
Yeah, I know,
union
but still.
corruption. I think I dated a girl whose father was that guy. But you really, if you look at Homeboy, it's the ups, the downs, the
I will watch
surviving.
it. All right.
All right.
It's always great to catch up with
Thank
you,
you,
Joe.
guys. Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
for having me
All right,
on.
7:30
Excellent.
on a Wednesday. We'll take a time out. We'll come
I'll
back
shake
on the
hands
other.
with Rich
We'll
later.
come back on the
Okay.
other side and we'll recap.